Hello, my name is Alison Ota, and I'm the Director of the Royal Asiatic Society. I'm very pleased to welcome you to a tour of the exhibition Extraordinary Endeavours, celebrating 200 years of the RAS, which was held in the Brunei Gallery, SOAS, between the 12th of October and the 16th of December 2023. The exhibition was curated by myself, Nancy Charlie, our archivist, Dr. Amy Mathewson, who is assisting in the library, and Dr. Edward Weech, our librarian. This exhibition traced the development of Asian studies in Britain and Europe as revealed through the Society's collections and the achievements of its members. It also highlights the important contributions made by Asian teachers, translators and artists who played significant roles in facilitating British and European scholars in their encounters and explorations of Asia over the past 200 years. However, before we begin, I would just like to draw your attention to 3 manuscripts which are among the jewels of our collection. All 3 are on long loan to the University Library, Cambridge, and have been digitised and are available on the University and the Society's websites. Although they were not exhibited, we thought we should include reference to these manuscripts because of their importance. So the figure of the scribe, which was used on the banners advertising the exhibition, was taken from the Gulistan of Sadi, copied at Fatehpur Sikri in 1583 during the reign of the Mughal Emperor Akbar. It is an absolutely exquisite manuscript, where the pages are decorated with birds that literally fly off the page, along with tender bucolic scenes. But more importantly, it is known for the colophon portrait of the calligrapher Muhammad Hussain al-Kashmiri, known as the Golden Pen, and the artist Manohar, who went on to have a long and illustrious career at the court of Shah Jahan. The next manuscript from which a painting was reproduced is an autographed copy of the verses of Zafar Khan, entitled the Kitab al-Mazawiyati Zafar Khan, which was copied in Lahore in 1663. He was a noble at the court of Shah Jahan and succeeded his father as governor of Kashmir, and the painting depicts him in the company of poets. The final manuscript which was referenced in the exhibition is the Muhammad Juki Shahnameh, or Book of Kings, which tells of the mythical past of Iran and was composed by the poet Firdausi at the end of the 10th century. This manuscript was copied in Herat in 1445 for the Timurid prince Muhammad Juki, who unfortunately died before it was completed. It contains 29 miniatures, with 2 further miniatures added during the Mughal period. It bears the seals of the Mughal emperors from Babur to Aurangzeb. The image displays Gushtasp slaying a dragon, and we can see the coral rocks within a dreamy, magical landscape against a blue sky with Chinese cloud scrolls, all devices typical of Timurid painting. We now start the narrative of the exhibition, looking at Asian studies in early modern Europe. In this period, very few people in Europe studied Asian languages. However, during the 16th century, interest developed in studying Arabic texts, which contained translations of the Greek knowledge which had been lost to the West but had been translated into Arabic. On display at the center of the cabinet, we have a copy of the Kitab al-Qanun fi al-Tibb, a medical text by Ibn Sina, or Avicenna as he's known in the West, who is one of the most famous Arab philosopher-scientists. And this was used as a textbook in European universities up to the 17th century. This volume was published by the Medici Press in Rome in 1593. The other important center at the time for publications in Arabic was Leiden, and here is a copy of the Historia Saracenica, which is a translation into Latin from Arabic of the history of the Arabs from the time of Muhammad to the reign of the Mamluk Sultan Baybars in 1260. It was written in the 13th century by the Coptic historian Al-Amid. It was translated by Thomas Erpenius, who was professor of Arabic at Leiden University, and was the first translation of an Arabic text in modern times. The lower shelf of the cabinet displays travel literature. On the left, we have the travels of Jean Chardin, a French Huguenot jeweler who left France in 1664 to travel to India, and during his travels he visited Persia, where he lived for 4 years. His account provides interesting details of life in Safavid Iran. He later emigrated to England, where he became the court jeweler to Charles II and was subsequently knighted. The other volume is a German translation of the original Dutch edition by Arnoldus Montanus, published a year before in 1669 in Amsterdam, of the memorable embassies of the Dutch East India Company to the emperors of Japan, which is one of the most important works on Japan published in the 17th century. The large image on the wall shows an engraving of the town of Kagoshima in southern Kyushu, but Arnoldus Montanus and his engraver Jacob van Meurs had never visited Japan, relying solely on travellers' accounts and secondary sources. The volume at the centre of the lower shelf is a printed copy of the Cihan Numa, written by Katib Çelebi, the Ottoman intellectual, in 1648. This was published by the Mutaferrika Press, which was established in Istanbul in 1729 and published historical and scientific works in Arabic type, further facilitating the exchange of knowledge between Europe and the Ottoman Empire. Various images from the text were produced for the exhibition, such as the map of India and his diagrams of spheres. The binding carries the tugra or monogram of Mahmud II, who reigned between 1808 and 1839, indicating it was bound by the palace workshop to be given as a gift from the Sultan. The next section looked at the roots of the Royal Asiatic Society, which can be found in the Asiatic Society of Bengal, founded by Sir William Jones, a renowned linguist who served in Calcutta as a judge for the East India Company, and he founded the Asiatic Society of Bengal in 1784. He had studied Arabic and Persian at Oxford, publishing a grammar of the Persian language in 1771. On arrival in India, he enthusiastically began to study Sanskrit with leading scholars such as Pandit Ramlochan Sharma, and published several translations of works of Indian literature and legal texts in collaboration with his teachers, whose names he recorded in his papers and notebooks. The Asiatic Society provided a forum for the exchange of knowledge and ideas about the history, arts, and sciences of India, and remains active in Calcutta today. Indian members were first admitted in 1829, and its first Indian president, Rajendra Lal Mitra, was elected in 1885. He was a pioneering figure in the Bengali Renaissance, who published a number of major scholarly works, including the Antiquities of Orissa, a magnus opus of Orissan architecture based on fieldwork accompanied by extensive socio-cultural and historical analysis. William Jones's essay on the gods of Greece, Italy, and India, published in the Asiatic Researchers in Calcutta in 1798, sets out Jones's belief that all human beings derive from a common origin. At a time when many European writers stress the differences between cultures and the superiority of European civilizations, Jones sought to establish parallels between the languages, gods, and myths of Greece, Italy, and India, advocating for a world of cultural cosmopolitanism. Jones translated Kalidas's Sakuntala, or the Fatal Ring, written between the 4th and 5th centuries, from the Sanskrit and Prakrit to English, which was published in 1790. The translation was reprinted 5 times between 1791 and 1807. In his introduction, Jones specifically thanks Pandit Ramlochan for his assistance with the translation of the text, which, I add, Jones first translated into Latin before English. This story went on to inspire the German poet Goethe's prologue to Faust, and was later adopted for opera by Franz Schubert in 1820. It was also performed at the Edinburgh Fringe as a rock opera in 2015. We now turn to the foundation of the RAS, or Royal Asiatic Society, by Henry Thomas Colebrook in London in 1823. Britain's expanding trade and imperial interests in Asia meant there were unprecedented opportunities and new incentives to learn about the continent's languages, religions, art, literature, and history. A growing number of people in Britain, including many of those who had returned from India, felt the need for a dedicated institution similar to the Asiatic Society of Bengal, where they could meet and exchange ideas. The text of Colebrook's address to the first meeting of the Royal Asiatic Society on the 15th of March 1823, later published in Transactions of the Royal Asiatic Society, Volume 1, 1827, set out its objectives. The primary goal was the advancement of knowledge in relation to Asia. The seals and signet for the society were designed by the artists, uncle and nephew, Thomas and William Daniel. They made 3 tours of India over 9 years, sketching views which were later published in Oriental Scenery in 6 volumes. The designs include an elephant with a howdah, a banyan tree, the cultivator, and the Delhi Observatory, clearly marking the Indian roots of the society. As British scholars in Asia sought to discover more about the region, they turned to local assistants and teachers to provide access and to interpret texts and traditions. Sometimes knowledge was needed for practical purposes, such as British administrators seeking information about Indian laws to help them in their own legal practice. This was an important impetus for the publication of the Digest of Hindu Laws in 1810, which was started by Sir William Jones and completed by Henry Colebrook. Others saw Asian texts, art, and architecture as sources of creative inspiration, or were curious about how people lived in previously unfamiliar parts of the world. The RAS provided a forum to publicize their views and discoveries. Colebrook had a wide range of interests, including mathematical Sanskrit texts, and in 1817 he published his translation entitled Algebra with Arithmetic and Mensuration from the treatises of the Indian mathematicians and astronomers Brahmagupta and Bhaskara, both pioneers in the development of algebra. This helped to bring India's rich mathematical heritage to the attention of the wider world. To this day, it remains the only translation of these works and was republished recently in 2013. Another founder member of the society, George Staunton, who learnt Chinese as a boy of 12 when he accompanied his father on the Macartney mission in 1793 to the court of the Qinlong Emperor, he learned Chinese on the journey and later joined the East India Company in Canton. He translated a significant part of the Qing Penal Code, covering constitutional, civil, and penal law, which was the first direct English translation of a Chinese text. He donated a Latin-Chinese dictionary, which was compiled in 1745 and acquired by the Augustinian missionary Padre Adeodato in Peking, who had given it to Sir George Staunton, who presented the dictionary to the RAS in 1824. Although Jesuit missionaries in China in the 17th and 18th centuries produced a number of dictionaries, this one is unusual, for it is Latin to Chinese rather than Chinese to Latin. One of the activities of the Society was the establishment of the Oriental Translation Fund in 1828. In total, 117 translations have been published. The first in 1829 was the publication of the Travels of Ibn Battuta, who was a Moroccan explorer known for his account of his extraordinary travels in Asia, Europe, and Africa, which became an important source of information and inspiration for European readers. It was appropriately chosen as the first text to be published by the Oriental Translation Fund. The translator, the Reverend Samuel Lee, came from a poor family in rural Shropshire. He studied Latin while completing a carpentry apprenticeship and eventually mastered 18 languages, becoming Professor of Arabic at Cambridge in 1819. Another important publication, Essay on the Architecture of the Hindus by Ram Ras, was published in 1834. Ram Ras was first employed by the East India Company as a clerk, later becoming a judge in Bangalore. He was commissioned by the RAS to compile a digest of Hindu architecture based on Sanskrit texts. He explains in the introduction to his book the difficulties he encountered in undertaking such a project, both in finding the texts themselves and Sanskrit scholars who were able to translate the treatises. He commissioned drawings from the Madras Survey Department of details found in South Indian temple architecture. Sadly, he died in 1830 before the publication of the manuscript. He was elected a member of the RAS in 1828, and his paper On Trial by Jury was read posthumously at the Society in 1834. We then turned to exploring the diversity of the collections. The founders of the Society wished to establish a library for scholars studying the languages and cultures of Asia. Its first members responded eagerly to the call for donations. Sir George Thomas Staunton donated his library of Chinese books, and other members quickly followed suit, donating books, manuscripts, artworks, and objects. These now form the core of the Society's heritage collection, which continues to serve as an important research resource, attracting scholars from around the globe. Today, there is widespread awareness that many objects of cultural heritage now found in Western collections were acquired in the course of violence or taken without permission. Ongoing research suggests the overwhelming majority of Asian manuscripts and artworks in the Society's collection were either purchased or gifted by their former owners in the course of diplomatic exchange, or were copies of original works commissioned by European collectors. These early donations encompass many topics, including religion, literature, science, and architecture. For example, we start with a pilgrimage scroll datable to the 19th century. Pilgrimage scrolls were used to commemorate the pilgrimage or Hajj to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. This scroll depicts sites associated with Shia Islam and begins in Mecca and ends in Karbala, Iraq, where in 680 Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, was defeated and killed. The outer walls of the Prophet's mosque in Medina are delineated by an inscription in Kufic script of the Shahada. In turning to Buddhist texts, this Sanskrit palm leaf manuscript, Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 sections, was purchased by Brian Horton Hodgson, who was British resident in Nepal for 23 years. One of Hodgson's many interests was Buddhism, and he began collecting manuscripts in Nepal for study. His first essay on the subject, Sketch of Buddhism derived from Buddha, Scriptures of Nepal, was published in the Transactions of the Royal Asiatic Society in 1830. Hodgson was unable to read Sanskrit, so he relied on the Nepalese scholar Amritananda to interpret the manuscripts he had collected. Another example is a Kamavacha manuscript from Burma. The text is written on copper plates. Kamavacha manuscripts use different base materials, varying from cloth to metal and to ivory, and these were then lacquered and then gilded. They record the Buddhist monastic code of rules and precepts and were donated to monasteries at the ordination of monks. Most Pali and Myanmar language manuscripts are written in standardized script. Kamavacha manuscripts use one called tamarind seed, which requires special training to read. For Hinduism, we chose two paintings from Jaipur, done in the early 19th century, donated to the Society by Nardo Baxter, who was born in India in 1793 and was the son of a manufacturer. Ganesha is known as the remover of obstacles and the bringer of luck. He is the offspring of the goddess Parvati. Several myths detail his birth and acquisition of the elephant head. He is one of the best known and most worshipped deities of the Hindu pantheon. Krishna is an important figure in Hinduism, both as an independent deity and as an avatara, incarnation of Vishnu. Devotion to the god has been widespread, and his cult was particularly connected with late medieval saints who emphasized the importance of unconditional surrender to the deity. Much of this is demonstrated through poetry and singing. In the section on literature and leisure, we included The Snakes and Ladders, which was produced in about 1800 in Nagpur, as the game originated in India and was used to teach moral lessons to its players. In addition, we included a Persian manuscript on chess datable to the early 15th century, with parts repainted at a later date in India. It includes information on the beneficial effects of chess, the invention of the game in India, and some endgame decisions, accompanied by 64 diagrams of chess problems. It was donated by the widow of Major David Price in 1836. David Price was a noted Persian scholar who was awarded the gold medal by the Oriental Translation Fund for his translation of the Jahangir Nameh. Also, we included a Khamsa. The Khamsa is considered one of the great works of Persian literature and consists of 5 narrative poems composed by Nizami Ganjavi and is datable to 1450. It was probably produced in Shiraz, and the miniature, which we displayed, depicts an episode from the Iskandar-Nameh, the story of Alexander the Great, in which he is wooing the daughter of King Kade of India. We also included 2 manuscripts from the Malay world. The first, a form of Javanese divinatory calendar, known as Pao Wukon. Illustrations of the figures in the manuscripts are typically done in the Javanese shadow puppet style, wayang style. The god Vataragana or Ganesha is represented here with a parrot. The manuscript was copied for Sir Thomas Stanford Raffles when he was in Java between 1811 and 1816, and was donated to the Society by his second wife, Sophia, in 1830. Raffles is generally acknowledged as the founder of the British colony that was to become Singapore. We also included a Malay version of the heroic tales of Alexander the Great, who's identified with Dhul Qarnain, the 2-horned one, mentioned in Surah Al-Kahf in the Quran, and considered the legendary ancestor of the Malay kings. It is one of the earliest known Malay works that was adopted and adapted from Persian and possibly Arabic sources. The manuscript was copied for William Farquhar when he was resident in Malacca, and he presented this and 9 other Malay manuscripts to the RAS in 1827. Also included, under scientific manuscripts, was an almanac from the Todd collection from Rajasthan, containing astronomical, astrological, and meteorological information for the year corresponding to 1818. 3 painted panels depict a barefooted grey-blue Krishna in the centre, flanked by 2 female figures, gopis, the deity Ganesha with his consorts Riddhi and Siddhi, and 2 women and a cow, with a small rectangle bearing the word Ram in Devanagari script. A Persian copy of the Ajab al-Makhluqat, the Wonders of Creation, datable to about 1475, composed by Al-Khazvini in the 13th century, was also included. This text was frequently copied throughout the Islamic world and translated into Persian and Turkish. Drawing on earlier sources, Khazvini divided his text into 2 sections, dealing in the first part with the heavens, the angels, constellations, and astrology, and in the second, the earth, which included plants, animals, birds, minerals, and the 4 elements. The undated colophon is signed by Muhammad, known as Baqal, the grocer, and by the painter Abdul Karim. Also, we included the paintings of Sheikh Zain al-Din, one of the great Indian artists of the 18th century, who produced a series of exquisite paintings recording the flora and fauna of Bengal for Mary Lady Impey, the wife of Sir Elijah Impey, the Chief Justice of Bengal. Sir William Jones and his wife Anna Maria Lady Jones, who had a keen interest in botany, particularly in the identification of Indian plants and their Sanskrit names, also commissioned a series of plants and flowers from Sheikh Zain al-Din, which Lady Jones later donated to the Society. We also included architectural drawings, with 2 drawings of buildings in the Kathmandu Valley by Rajman Singh, commissioned by Brian Horton Hodgson, the Dancer Temple and the Temple of Krishna and Radha in Patan. Brian Horton Hodgson, British resident in Kathmandu from 1824 to 1843, devoted the years he lived there to the study of the people's culture, customs, religion, natural history, and architecture of Nepal. He employed Nepalese artists, amongst them Rajman Singh, to make drawings of the buildings in the Kathmandu Valley, which constitute the earliest representations of Buddhist architecture in Nepal. They were later used to help reconstruct buildings after the earthquake in 2015. Finally, we turn to the only film in our collection whose footage shows archaeological excavations within the ancient Assyrian city of Nineveh, situated on the river Tigris. It has been attributed to Reginald Campbell Thompson, a British Assyriologist, epigrapher, and archaeologist who directed excavations there between 1927 and 1932. We now move downstairs to the second part of the exhibition, which continues looking at the role of Asia in British life during the 19th century. The birds on the walls are taken from the Gulistan manuscript, which I mentioned at the beginning. Asian literature, art, and history gradually became more familiar to the public, initially through the work of intellectual elites, but over time also in the reading habits and entertainment of ordinary people. The Arabian Nights had long been the mainstay of bookshelves, and the pantomime Aladdin was first performed in London in 1788, but set in China rather than ancient Arabia. The Arabian Nights is a collection of folk tales that have captivated British readers since they were first published in English during the 18th century. The 1885 translation by the explorer Sir Richard Burton emphasised the sexual elements of the original stories. Victorian restrictions on obscene publications meant his edition had to be published by subscription. This led his wife Isabel to publish a new edition in 1887, prepared for household reading, which she presented to Queen Victoria. Other works of Asian origin exerted a major pull on the British imagination. One example was Edward Fitzgerald's translation of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, first published in 1859, which achieved phenomenal success later in the century, eventually becoming one of the most popular poems in the English-speaking world. This version contains illustrations by Amandindranath Tagore, who founded the influential Bengal school of art that led to the development of modern Indian painting. In the 1850s, there was substantial public interest in the race to decipher cuneiform, the world's oldest known writing system used in ancient Mesopotamia. The decipherment of the Akkadian language, including its Babylonian dialect, written in cuneiform, was a hot topic, with the accuracy of the translations by different scholars seriously debated. Edward Norris, secretary of the RAS, set up a test in 1857 to examine the skills of 4 individuals: Edward Hincks, Jules Aubert, Henry Rawlinson, and William Fox Talbot, asking them to decipher a recently discovered Assyrian inscription. Rawlinson's and Hincks' translations were almost identical, and thereby their versions were judged to be correct, providing the necessary key for others to decipher Mesopotamian cuneiform. British scholars of Asia have always depended, directly or indirectly, on the knowledge and research of Asian scholars to interpret and provide access to primary sources. For example, the Pali Text Society was established in 1881 by Thomas William Reeds Davids, secretary and librarian of the RAS, for the publication of Buddhist texts. The text, Buddha Vamsa and Karya Pitaka, was translated by the Reverend Richard Morris a close friend of Thomas Rhys-Davids, and published in 1882. The translation was made possible by the donation of a palm leaf manuscript of the text to the RAS by Subhuti Unnanes of Sri Lanka, whom Morris thanks in the book's dedication. In grateful acknowledgement for the generous aid he has rendered to European scholars and in sincere respect for his enlightened scholarship. Caroline Rhys-Davids, wife of Thomas Rhys-Davids, was also actively involved as an editor, translator, and interpreter of Buddhist texts in the Pali language. She was honorary secretary of the Pali Text Society from 1907 to 1922 and its president from 1923 to 1942. A translation of a Buddhist manual of psychological ethics was published by the Oriental Translation Fund in 1923. We also included in the exhibition a manuscript of religious songs in Romanized Hindi by Ram Garib Chobe, who worked as an assistant to the folklorist William Crook. The papers consist of 20 Indian religious songs, collected, transcribed, and translated into English by him. He began to collaborate with Crook in 1892, providing information for Crook's book, Popular Religion and Folklore, first published in 1894 and then reissued as a 2-volume revised and illustrated edition in 1896. Chobe resented that his input was not acknowledged by Crook. His contribution to tribes and castes of the northwestern provinces was only briefly mentioned in 2 footnotes. As well as those involved in scholarly tasks, intrepid explorers and archaeologists such as Sir Mark Aurel-Stein continued to conduct fieldwork in remote regions throughout the 20th century. Sir Mark Aurel-Stein was a Hungarian-born archaeologist who is known for his expeditions to sites of forgotten cultures along the Eastern Silk Roads, the network of trade routes across Eurasia. He organized 4 archaeological expeditions to Eastern Central Asia between 1900 and 1930, resulting in several major publications. In his 81st year, Stein set out on an expedition to Afghanistan, but died in Kabul a week after his arrival. The RAS has a collection of 800 photographs, many selected for inclusion in Stein's publications, from the thousands taken to document his travels and discoveries. Stein acknowledged his debt of gratitude to those who helped him, describing Jiang Suye in Ruins of Desert Cathay as not merely an excellent teacher and secretary, but a devoted helpmate, ever ready to face hardships for the sake of my scientific interests. They remained friends, meeting on Stein's subsequent expedition and writing to each other until Chiang's death. Stein sent funds to enable Chiang's body to be transported back to his home and family in central China. Stein took numerous photographs of those he met on his expeditions, including Sabat Ali Khan, the leader of the Afghan traders in Kucha, who hosted Stein during his visit in 1908. Stein often included his dog in his photographs. Pictured here is Dash 2, the second of his line of 7 dogs, all called Dash, and all except one fox terriers. Dash 2 was known as Dash the Great and Kardash Beg, the Honourable Snow Companion, and even had an article about his travels in the Times newspaper. Dash is dressed in his Kashmiri coat to keep warm. However, he came to an untimely end after his retirement in Oxford, after being run over by a bus. Stein was awarded the Society's Gold Medal in 1932. Others applied themselves to the critical study and translation of manuscripts and inscriptions for the benefit of academic and general audiences throughout the world. These 2 folios from a dispersed manuscript of the Razamname, or Book of War, a Persian translation of the Hindu epic of the Mahabharata, were donated to the Society by Professor Charles Ambrose Story, who dedicated his life to documenting sources for the study of Persian literature. One of his greatest achievements was the publication of Persian literature, a biobibliographical survey, which classified literature by topic rather than time period. When Story died in 1968, he bequeathed the whole of his estate to the Society, including his library and art collection. The exhibition also included an important collection of letters of Thomas Manning, who was a Cambridge mathematician and supporter of the French Revolution, who participated in the early Romantic movement alongside friends including Charles Lamb and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Manning had a deep interest in learning Chinese and visiting China. The language and culture of China was little known in the 18th century, but it was understood to be an advanced and sophisticated civilization. Manning dedicated the better part of his life to learning about China, and he studied Chinese in Napoleonic France, where he was interned as a prisoner of war, and later in the port of Canton, the centre of European trade with China. Manning wanted to explore China to observe its social life, but the borders were closed to Europeans, and he eventually tried to enter the country through the Himalayas. In 1811-1812, he became the first Englishman to visit Lhasa, where he met the Dalai Lama. His letters to his father provide fascinating insights into life at that time. Manning arrived in Canton in 1807 to study Chinese. Here he met Sir George Staunton, one of the founders of the Royal Asiatic Society. He gives an account of the Neptune incident, when a British sailor was accused of causing the death of a Chinese after a fight between British seamen and Chinese men. He describes a lavish entertainment given by one of the Chinese security merchants. "I wish I could give you an account of the dinner, but 'tis beyond me. I began upon a basin of bird's nest soup, then shark's fins, then fisher's roe. Ah, I'm lost." Manning met the young Dalai Lama, Lung Tok Gyatso, who was 7 years old, several times in Lhasa. They communicated through Chinese interpreters, with the Lama speaking in Tibetan and Manning in Latin, and he drew his picture in his notebook. Dr. Edward Weech, the Society's current librarian, tells the story of Thomas Manning in his recent book entitled Chinese Dreams in Romantic England. The exhibition presented an opportunity for the Society to show items of the collection that were too fragile to display. So 2 large scroll paintings of the towns of Shigatse and Lhasa in Tibet were photographed in sections and the images displayed in the Thomas Manning section. Both of these paintings were donated by the American diplomat William Woodville Rockhill, who was appointed to the legation in Beijing between 1884 and 1888. He travelled extensively through China, Mongolia, and Tibet. We now turn to the RAS in the 21st century, and recent acquisitions were included, showing how the collection still continues to grow. 8 volumes of lithographed texts were donated to the Society by William Robinson in memory of his father, the distinguished art historian Basil Robinson, who was president of the Society from 1970 to 1973. During the late Qajar period, lithography permitted the mass production of images and texts. People were now able to buy illustrated books in the form of lithographs, making classical texts such as the Shahnameh of Ferdowsi accessible to the wider public. Here on display is a copy of the Iskandernameh, depicting the story of Alexander, which was printed in Tehran in 1867. A set of the first edition of the collective works of Sir William Jones and the associated life of Jones by Lord Teignmouth were donated by Professor Michael Lowy, a distinguished scholar of early Chinese history, on the occasion of his 100th birthday and the Society's bicentenary. He has been a Fellow of the Society since 1959 and has served on council and committees. The papers of Angus C. Graham were also given to the Society. He was Professor of Classical Chinese at SOAS and was a central figure in the field of Chinese studies in post-Second World War Britain. Through his academic research, translations, and landmark publications, he not only shaped the understanding of classical Chinese philosophy within his academic discipline, but furthered its appreciation within wider intellectual circles. Poems of the late Tang inspired Roger Waters of the rock group Pink Floyd, while several of Graham's translations of Chinese poetry have been set to music, and the original scores can be found in the archive. For example, The East Wind Sighs by Li Changyin was translated by A.C. Graham and set to music by the Welsh composer Mervyn Birch. Two archive collections associated with the life and work of Terence Stannis Gray and his wife, Princess Natalia Bagration of Imereti, were recently donated to the Society. Gray authored numerous works on Taoism and Chinese philosophy under the pen name Wei Wu Wei, which translates as action that is non-action. He was a prominent literary figure with diverse interests, including horse racing, archaeology, and theatre. The proofs of his book, Unworldly Wise, as the Owl said to the Rabbit, published in 1974, contains dialogues between a wise owl, a naive rabbit, an acquisitive squirrel, a misunderstood dragon, and a religious dragon, serving as a guide for those seeking enlightenment. The Papers of Fleming Mackenzie is another recent acquisition given to the Society in 2022 by his daughter, Mrs. Anne O'Neill. Lieutenant Colonel Fleming Mackenzie commanded the 15th Punjab Regiment escort to the trade agent in Tibet between 1938 and 39. Mackenzie's photographs contain many rare views of Tibet, including the capital of Lhasa. Now, in turning to the role that women played in the Royal Asiatic Society, the Society's membership was all male until 1856, when the composer and translator Mrs. Louisa Hay Kerr became its first female member. While the number of female applicants for membership was initially low, women played an important role in the life of the Society. Anna Maria Lady Jones, Sophia Lady Raffles, and Mrs. Susan Hodgson made substantial donations of artworks and manuscripts to the collections. By the late 19th century, women were making prominent, independent contributions as scholars, explorers, and collectors. In 2021, the first woman president was elected, Professor Sarah Ansari. We exhibited paintings of women from the collection, and this included one from the Todd collection of Rajput princesses killing a lion by an unknown Indian artist in Bundi, painted between 1810 and 1820. James Todd, who collected this painting, astutely noted that the custom of Rajput women observing purdah was no bar to their excelling at outdoor pursuits, nor did it prevent them from active participation in court politics. However, although he extolled the virtues of the first activity, he decried the second. The next painting depicts a young woman daydreaming of her absent lover as she plays a veena to a herd of deer, also by an unknown Indian artist, datable to 1820, and is from a Ragamana series. Indian classical music is based on the idea of a raga, in which a melody is developed, evoking emotions, times of day, and seasons of the year. This idea was extended further on the assumption that these evocations can be depicted in paintings and even in verses. In this system, each raga has a wife, or ragini, and here we have Todi Ragini, evoking love and separation. Painting from Burma, datable to about 1880, shows the ladies of the court of Prince Thibaw in a landscape, talking, playing on swings, and smoking very long cigarettes. Prince Thibaw was the last king of Burma, who succeeded his father after a bloody succession massacre orchestrated by his wife's mother to ensure that he ascended the throne. He was later deposed by the British in 1824 and was exiled to Ratnagiri in India, where he remained until his death. Lady Jones, the wife of Sir William Jones, was very interested in botany and a painting of a flame lily, Gloriosa Superba, along with her sketchbook containing drawings and notes by herself and her husband, was included in the exhibition. The couple spent the summers in Krishnagar, drawing the plants around them, identifying their Sanskrit names and their place in Hindu culture, literature, and medicine. A watercolour of an Indian temple by Frances Unwin, an amateur artist and wife of Arthur Hamilton Unwin, who served in India as a deputy commissioner, was included to re-establish her identity as an artist, as her paintings had been initially catalogued under her husband's name, although they were clearly signed by her. Finally, a portrait of Freya Stark by Lord Methuen completed the panel. She's well known as an intrepid explorer and traveller in the Middle East, and was the first woman to be awarded the Burton Medal by the Society in 1943. We move now to the photograph collection. The Society is a large collection of photographs representing the whole of Asia, dating from the early days of photography to the late 20th century. The collections include photographs by several well-known pioneering photographers, including Milton Miller, Felice Beato, John Thompson, Lala Deen Dayal, and Henry Cousins. With the development of photography in the mid-19th century, this new technology was applied to a variety of subjects and genres, from portraiture to recording, architectural and topographical views. The use of photography in archaeological fieldwork became increasingly common from the mid-1850s, and by the end of the 19th century had largely superseded other graphic media in the recording of archaeological sites and excavations. Henry Cousins had a distinguished career as an archaeologist in India from the 1870s until his retirement as head of the Western Circle of the Archaeological Survey in 1910. He was a skilled photographer, taking several thousand images of archaeological subjects in the course of his work. His most ambitious photograph project, undertaken in 1900, was the comprehensive documentation of the elaborate sculptural decoration of the gateways of the great Buddhist stupa at Sanchi. For this work he devised an elaborate wooden framework which enabled him to raise his camera parallel to each section and to photograph the individual panels without distortion and to uniform scale. This took Cousins and his assistants over 2 months to complete and resulted in a collection of over 250 large format glass negatives. Next, the Scottish photographer John Thompson first established a photographic studio in Singapore in 1862, and in the following years travelled widely in Southeast Asia. Inspired by Henri Mouhot's travels in the central parts of Indochina, Cambodia, and Laos, which introduced the ruins of Angkor Wat to a Western audience, Thompson visited Cambodia in 1866 and produced the first photographic record of the great Hindu-Buddhist temple complex. Published in book form the following year, these images established his reputation both as an intrepid traveller and a masterly photographer. The stereoscopic view was an immensely popular format in the second half of the 19th and into the 20th centuries, particularly for the production of travel views. When seen through a special viewer, the two card-mounted photographs merged to give an astonishingly convincing illusion of a single three-dimensional image. These rare stereoscopic images of the ruins of Ani, former capital of the Armenian Empire, were taken by Kökçüan before he left Armenia in the 1880s, finally settling in Java, where he established a successful studio in Surabaya and remained there until his death. Next, we turn to the photographs of Lala Deen Dayal. He was the proprietor of the most successful Indian photographic studio in 19th century India, competing in a commercial environment largely dominated by European studios. He had first worked as a draftsman before taking up photography and establishing his own studio in the late 1860s. He later established studios in Indore, Mumbai, and Hyderabad. becoming a leading court photographer and state photographer to the 6th Nizam of Hyderabad, who dubbed him as the bold warrior of photography. In 1875, he photographed the royal tour of the Prince of Wales and was appointed photographer to Queen Victoria in 1897. In addition to his portraits, Lala Deen Dayal produced a wide range of architectural and topographical views. These photographs are from a series of views taken by Deen Dayal in 1882, when he was commissioned to accompany Sir Lepel Griffin, the Governor-General's agent for Central India, on a tour of palaces, forts and temple sites that included Gwalior and Sanchi. Griffin had a keen interest in Indian architecture, and Deen Dayal's photographs were taken with the stated aim of recording the more important sites. From the extensive series of photographs taken by Deen Dayal in the course of this tour, 89 were later published by Griffin in his famous Monuments of Central India in 1886. We now turn to a Japanese album. This album of 34 hand-tinted photographs of temples, gardens and ladies in kimono was exhibited for the first time. The album was discovered in a charity shop and donated to the Society in 2001. From the mid to late 19th century, before the invention of colour photography, the practice of hand-colouring photographs was commonplace, particularly for travel and tourist views. The practice is notable in work from Japanese studios, where particularly delicate styles of colouring were developed in the production of views made largely for sale to foreign customers, as the country was increasingly opened up to Western visitors from the 1870s onwards. Such collections were characteristically bound in elaborately decorated lacquer albums. Finally, we have a selection of photographs from the Howell collection, consisting of 400 views of China, Japan and the Philippines, dated to the early 1860s. This includes photographs by the renowned photographers Milton Miller and Felice Beato. They were acquired in China between 1860 and 1864 by A.P. Howell of Dent & Co., one of the wealthiest merchant companies based in China during the 19th century. In turning to maps, the Society's collection contains maps from across Asia, including naval charts and archaeological, geological and linguistic maps. Many were donated by members, while others were acquired from institutions including the Survey of India, the Royal Society of Asian Affairs and even the War Office. Most of the maps date between the Society's foundation in 1823 and the 1950s. 3 were on exhibition. The first, an Ottoman map of the Damascus-Mecca-Hejaz Railway, datable to 1904. The Hejaz Railway was built to reinforce Ottoman control over the Arabian provinces and originally conceived to connect the holy cities of Mecca and Medina to the imperial capital Istanbul via Damascus. Construction began in 1900 and the line reached Medina in 1908, where it terminated, and the remainder of the line to Mecca was never completed. This map shows the railway line with the place names and key geographical features transliterated and translated from Ottoman Turkish to English. The second map was a town plan of Madras by C.V. Ramaswamy. Ramaswamy was vice president of the Hindu Literary Society, and he used the original survey data for a town plan of Madras by Captain William Ravenshaw in 1822 to create a guide for strangers. He was one of the 3 Cavalli brothers who had worked with Colin Mackenzie, the first Surveyor General of India, on the survey of South India. Ramaswamy was among the original members of the Madras Literary Society, an affiliate of the Asiatic Society of Bengal and later a sister society of the Royal Asiatic Society, London. The third map, entitled Nimrud and Selamiya, Vestiges of Assyria by Felix Jones, is one of 3 maps that show excavations conducted by Austin Henry Layard in the 1840s of the archaeological sites of Nineveh and Nimrud near Mosul in present-day Iraq. The maps were presented to the Society in manuscript form in 1853 by Felix Jones, a naval officer who had surveyed the area with J.M. Hislop by the order of the Government of India in 1852. These maps were prepared to honour Layard and were later published in 1855. This is the second sheet showing the ancient sites in the vicinity of Nimrud. The map is annotated in English, Greek, Arabic and cuneiform, courtesy of Sir Henry Creswick Rawlinson. Layard's discoveries are clearly marked in bright red. Finally, we come to the Todd collection. Lieutenant Colonel James Todd, the Society's first librarian, is remembered as the author of the monumental 2-volume Annals and Antiquities of Rajasthan, published in 1829 and 1832. This multifarious text about Western India is part history, part ethnography, part literary study, and part travelogue. The rich detail of Todd's book was rooted in his 24 years of continuous service in India between 1799 and 1823, the last 17 of which were spent in and around Rajasthan. Todd donated to the Society several hundred Rajasthani manuscripts and a small collection of paintings. The Society's collection of Rajasthani manuscripts remains one of the most important in the world outside Rajasthan. Most of these manuscripts were copies that Todd had made from originals in various royal libraries. He employed as many as 16 scribes to copy texts. In a few cases, these copies remain the only known version of the texts, the originals having since been lost. A similar ethic informed his attitude towards painting. The Todd paintings in the Society's collection are generally contemporary compositions or contemporary copies of older paintings. Todd had the good fortune of having a number of supremely talented Rajasthani painters working for him, including Ghazi, whom Todd hired on a salaried basis. And we can see here Ghazi's detailed drawing of the north elevation of the temple of Rana Motala, Chittor. This is followed by the portrait of Maharana Bhim Singh of Udaipur on horseback, accompanied by attendants, also by Ghazi. And this was reproduced as the frontispiece for the first volume of the Annals and Antiquities, after redrawing, and one notes the different interpretations by the two artists. The painting of the Battle of Haldigati by another prominent Udaipur artist, Choker, was also exhibited. The battle was fought on the 18th of June 1576 between the Mewar army, led by Maharana Pratrap, and the forces of Man Singh of Amber. The Mughals won the day after Pratrap was persuaded to retreat. Todd also employed the artistic skills of his kinsman Patrick War, the head of his military escort, who made drawings of the important monuments of Rajasthan in a typically romantic style. For example, we see here the palace of Rani Bhim and Buddhamundi in Chittor. Other drawings were made by unknown British artists for reproduction in Todd's book, and here we have the Tower of Victory of Chittor, built in 1448 to commemorate the victory of Mewar over Melwar at the Battle of Sarangpur, followed by a watercolour of a temple in the fortress of Kumbhalgarh. Here we have a sepia drawing of the temples at Mainal in Mewar, next to a portrait of Salim Singh of Pokhran, Jodhpur, with his Rani on a camel by an unknown Indian artist. An interesting discovery was made in the course of the preparations of the exhibition, when we identified the painted background of the portrait of Rawat Bhim Singh, which shows a European town. Todd's Indian colleagues and assistants made significant contributions to his writings. The most notable of these interlocutors was Gyan Chandra, to whom Todd often referred as my guru, my teacher, and who was Todd's companion for nearly 20 years. Jain cosmographical representation of the continent of Jambudvipa with inscriptions by Tilachand and Dayachand, done in Jodhpur in 1817, was also exhibited. Jains believe the universe is divided into 3 worlds, the heavens, the middle world and the hells. This is a traditional painted diagram of the middle world, which is inhabited by human beings, which is made of concentric circles representing different continents, mountains and oceans. The outermost circle in pink is the mountain range, which marks the boundary beyond which human beings cannot live. The two blue circles represent two oceans. The three spaces created by these circles form the human world, the only part of the Jain universe in which the soul can achieve liberation from the cycle of death and rebirth. A Jain temple with worshippers is depicted at the four corners to signify the universal nature of the Jain doctrine. Finally, to celebrate its bicentenary, the Society reissued Todd's classic text, co-published with Yale University Press in 2023, which restores Todd's text to its original wording and includes newly restored impressions of all the original artwork that accompanied Todd's text. In addition, Norbert Peabody, a Fellow of the Society, has written an accompanying appreciation of Todd's text. This companion volume includes introductory essays, annotations, and extended explanatory notes that help the modern reader read this book afresh. So now, this has brought us to the end of the exhibition, which I hope you enjoyed.